All right, welcome everybody to Frank Analysis. My name is Franco. I'm your host. I'm joined today by Charles Anderson of the Lone Wolf Podcast and Reed Coverdale of the Naturalist Capitalist. How are you guys doing today?
Doing well.
Doing pretty good. Liking the cold weather here in South Carolina.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about Jo Jorgensen and why she may be the best option that's going to be on the ballot in all 50 states. And since this is Reed's first time being on the show, I'm going to ask if he could introduce himself a little bit more to the audience, and why he became a libertarian.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me on. I have been a libertarian-leaning person for the last, I'd say, 6 years. I think Ron Paul was probably the first guy who got me interested in it, and then Rand Paul in 2016, and then Gary Johnson. But I wasn't really a party member until this year, and I wasn't really sold on the entire platform until this year either. But I have, I have not always been against the idea of better government instead of less government. But this year we've just seen in, in practicality that more government or just the government we already have is pretty much beyond saving. So at this point, I'm pretty much good with just rolling it back because it doesn't seem like we're able to get a better government. And so I just want a government that we can keep control over, one that basically just protects our rights. And that's about it. So that's why I'm a libertarian. And as you pointed out, I have a show, The Naturalist Capitalist, where I talk about a lot of this type of stuff. So.
Yeah, definitely check that out. Subscribe to Reed's channel and also subscribe to Charles's channel, the Lone Wolf Podcast. And Charles, I think you're also leaning towards libertarian this election cycle.
Yeah, I am. Kind of like Reed. I've never been full-blown libertarian for years, but there's a lot of things that they advocate for that I've agreed with. For example, I don't like the government being that involved in our day-to-day life. The violations of the Fourth Amendment, all the war. These are a lot of things that libertarians will tell you, that they believe very strongly in. We need civil liberties. We don't need to be poking our nose in other people's affairs, and we need the people of this country to be able to live in a free country once again. So that's very strong libertarian principles. The economics, and I'm a lot more in agreement with it now. There's still some debate. We're not, but that's the thing we got to understand about presidential candidate when we start having these conversations is that there may be a couple of areas where I disagree with, say, the nominee this time or the nominee last time or potentially the libertarian nominee the next time around. You're never going to have a candidate that you agree with 100% of the time. As many people know, I supported Tulsi in the primary. Didn't mean I agreed with her on 100% of the things. But what I've looked at is what is important right now. And what is important right now is while I might be able to split hairs on a couple of policies, the one thing I know I want to see happen is civil liberties returned, us get out of the wars, and turn the power back over to the people of this country. And that's something that libertarians are really advocating for. So I might disagree on other things, but I'm going to prioritize when I'm going to pick and fight those battles. And right now is not necessarily that time to argue, well, I don't agree with you on these 5 issues, so I'm just not going to vote, period. I'm going to vote for someone who I think has the ballot access, actually advocates for good policy, and is a good alternative to Joe Biden and Donald Trump.
So let me ask you guys now, for people who don't know, who haven't done much research on Jo Jorgensen or haven't even looked at her campaign website, which I recommend people do check out, could you tell us a little bit more about her background, who she is, what she's done in the past in politics? Has she ever run for president or any kind of office before?
Do you want to go first, Charles, since she's from your backyard?
Yeah, I'll hop in there. She's been to a lot of different universities, but obviously the main one we like to brag about around here is she's been to Clemson University, right here in my home state of South Carolina. So that's definitely a good hometown person there. She wasn't born in South Carolina, but as far as her political career, she has ran on the Libertarian ticket, I believe, for vice president in 1996. So this isn't her first time going into the presidential field. Obviously, as far as winning an election or anything like that, the Libertarians obviously have not been elected president yet. So obviously she didn't win in 96. But this isn't her first time, at the rodeo. She's been through this before. In my opinion, I like her far better as a candidate than I did Gary Johnson. I thought Gary Johnson at times could be a lithell bit of an airhead at times. But he had some name recognition. I think that's why he got the nomination the last time, because he's been, what was he, the governor of New Mexico, I think, at one point. But yep. back to Jorgensen. She's got good policy when it comes to getting us out of the war. She's pitched things as far as the education system, which me and Reed have talked about a lot. We need massive education reform. I'll be honest, when you talk about getting rid of the Department of Education, there's a lot of ears in the room that go, and they don't like that because it kind of scares them. They think, well, we need regulation to govern our education system. And maybe there's a point to that, but the problem is the regulation that's in place right now has massively failed us as a society. It needs serious overhaul and perhaps torn down and built from the ground back up in a way that actually makes sense. One thing we talk about, for example, with education is when you go to college, all those extra classes you have to take when you get your degree that may not even apply to what you're going to get a degree for. And if you look at other countries around the world, remember, we've fallen to 27th in education in the world. But when you look at a lot of other countries, they don't require you to do things like that. So why do we do it here? And honestly, what I've seen is that because there's been more government, funding to get people into college, all these grants and whatnot, because the government opened up the checkbook, these colleges have taken full advantage of things like that and said, okay, because you're going to pay for it, now these people have to take all these classes to get the degree. That way we make more money. And so that seems to be the real reason that they've really tacked a lot of that stuff on. So the education system has serious flaws. It's not streamlining people at a sufficient way to get into a program, get certified, get a degree, and then be able to go out and get a job without being massively potentially in debt, or chewing through a lot of government funds to get you that education. There's not a very cost-effective process that's producing good results.
Yeah, if you want to elaborate a little bit more on that, Reed, you can go ahead.
Yeah. So I also voted for Tulsi in the primaries, actually. And what I did during the primary that I'm never going to do again is I just tried to defend every single thing about Tulsi to everybody. I'm not doing that for any politician ever again. So Jo Jorgensen, I like her. She might say some things sometimes that kind of weird me out, but all in all, I agree with her on most things, and she's been in the libertarian movement a long time. As Charles mentioned, she ran as VP back in '96. I personally liked Justin Amash the most, but out of everyone who was left after he bowed out, I think she was the best choice because she's a practical candidate. Something that's always kind of scared me about the Libertarian Party is, I think they're right when they want to remove a lot of these programs we have, but something we say in the Libertarian Party is, the government breaks your leg and then gives you a crutch, and then when we try to get rid of the government, people get upset that, you're taking the crutch away. And that's true, but you have to let their leg heal while they have the crutch still. If you just pull the rug out from under them, if you don't attack the military-industrial complex, the prison-industrial complex, like all these giant oppressive parts of our government, and you just go after food stamps or welfare, that's not productive. You have to restructure the government in order to make it obvious why a lot of these programs we have are destructive to the middle class and why they hurt low-income people, and then you can make a cogent argument. But she really is focused on going after the military-industrial complex, cutting, getting rid of corporate welfare, getting rid of, the war on drugs, trying to really get rid of all the oppressive parts of our government that have just completely destroyed the lives of so many citizens. And then if we can get there, then we can start talking about reforming Social Security, reforming the Department of Education. But I think I like her approach overall, that it's not like Jacob Hornberger. I don't know if you were familiar with him at all, but he was just if I could press a button, I would end everything having to do with government assistance. I would do it on day one. And I don't think that's a realistic approach. And I think if we actually won somehow and we had a president who did that type of things, that we would never win again. So I'm kind of glad she's the nominee.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, Hornberger is his name. He came in second place, I believe.
Yes.
Right. So, you guys mentioned going after the military-industrial complex and trying to end all these endless wars. You also mentioned attacking corporate welfare. So for a progressive like myself and for former Tulsi supporters like yourselves, and I guess even for Bernie supporters or former Bernie supporters, how would you convince those people to vote Libertarian this election cycle?
Well, what I would say, first of all, is the Libertarian Party is the only party that has ballot access in all 50 states. And I'll just be honest, Joe Jorgensen is not going to win. I mean, there's a very, very tiny possibility that she does, but by and large, it's not going to happen. So what voting Libertarian is about is getting permanent ballot access for a third party. There's all this talk about crushing the duopoly, making another option. If you really are serious about that this year, then you should vote Libertarian. And I realize people might not agree with her on every issue, but it doesn't matter because she's not going to be president. And even if she is president somehow, she's not going to be able to execute all the plans that scare you. So that's actually why I felt comfortable voting for Tulsi. I didn't support probably like 90% of her fiscal platform, but I knew that she would be able to end the wars. She'd be able to, overturn the Patriot Act. She'd be able to release victimless crimes. She wouldn't be able to pass most of her gun control ideas. So those were things I was like, all right, I don't agree with her on any of this, but if she somehow wins, the things that the executive branch has control over, she is going to change in a positive way. And it's the exact same thing with Joe Jorgensen. I think a Joe Jorgensen and a Tulsi Gabbard presidency would be remarkably similar. I mean, I don't think you'd actually see too much difference. It would really depend on who was in Congress and who was passing the bills. And, all these things like single payer healthcare, free college, reparations, whatever, they're never going to pass Congress anyway. They don't when it's a Democratic supermajority. So I think people who we're getting in a tizzy over the differences between Bernie's healthcare plan and Elizabeth Warren's healthcare plan and Tulsi's healthcare plan or whatever. It's all a little ridiculous because it's not like the president can just initiate his or her healthcare plan as soon as they take office. There's a ton of other things at play. So what really matters is what the executive branch has control over. And I'd say also Bernie Sanders, a Bernie Sanders presidency as far as executive power goes would be pretty similar to a Joe Jorgensen one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Charles,
I would agree with that. And this has been my whole take. As Reed pointed out, the odds of Joe winning in November are very slim anyway at this point. But we'll play devil's advocate, Israel's favorite thing to do, and we'll just say she won. Okay. The point that I've been making to a lot of people is it does you no good to win the presidency and nothing else, because you've got to have power in Congress or the Senate to really get things done. You're only going to have so much power in that one chair. Granted, you could try to write executive action after executive action, but I guarantee you, if you just do the Obama or the Trump style approach and have a pen and use it, they will impeach you, guarantee you, because why? You're the outsider to the two-party system. They didn't want you there in the first place. They'll also do everything they can to work against you, gridlock everything, and make you a one-term president. So even if you got that far, the success would be short-lived. You've got to really cripple the two-party system at the more root of the problem, which is in the Congress and the Senate. Once you can take that away so that they don't have control over a majority of that, so it means there has to be some working together to get anything done, even for their end. When you take that factor away, where they can't just steamroll the president or anything else, then you've actually got some change that can occur. As far as how I would pitch it out to anyone that's more on the left, as I pointed out earlier, there's probably going to be a lot of people who maybe potentially want to vote for the Green Party who think that, say, the climate issue is a really big problem. That's a big problem to them, right? If that's what their number one thing is, it probably might be hard for them to join the Libertarian Party. I understand Joe Jorgensen has, environment policy, but that's not necessarily the focus. Now, my take on that is this. This could be honest disagreement. Do I think things should be done in concerning our environment? Sure. But I understand this. If it isn't the environment that gets us, it's the world that we're living in, created by our politicians. I also understand that even if we were to do everything within our power to just fix our own environment policies, there's not exactly the way we're going to force countries like China and India to do it overnight too. And so that alone creates another battle. But as far as environmentalist policy is concerned, what I can pitch to you is this, okay? One big cause for a lot of the pollution and whatnot deals with war, all the bombs that we drop, right? So one thing Joe Jorgensen wants to do is get us out of the wars, okay? Something Tulsi advocated for. So that being said, we're going to start saving a lot of money that we could, if we didn't cut the budget, we could use on other things right here at home, okay? We're going to keep our nose in our own business. We're not going to be dropping bombs. We're not going to be, shooting missiles from drones or whatever, okay? We're not going to do that. So that alone is going to help the environment to a degree. So that would be a pitch to the left right there. As far as when we get into the healthcare now, a lot of people on the left want Medicare for all. Okay. Libertarian and more right-wing take on things isn't exactly quite there at Medicare for all. Something me and Reed have talked about in the past are like co-op systems, which kind of works like Medicare for all. Medicare for all is reliant on you paying taxes into a system, whereas co-op, it's outside of the government. It's a pool of people funding money together to cover medical bills. So it kind of works like Medicare for all, but is outside the parameters of the government. And my pitch to that would be, look, I understand that people on the left think that corporations or the private sector is more or less the problem. And in some cases, there's evidence to point to that. But arguably, the government isn't much better. If you take it step by step, while we would think that the government helping us with healthcare would be a great thing, understand this. How many government agencies have been put together or institutions have been put together to help the little man that they've mismanaged and ran into the ground over the years? Arguably the first one being Social Security. What shape is it in right now? Our VA healthcare system. What shape is it in right now? Our DMVs, all this paperwork backlog. So the problem is, while in theory, Medicare for all would be great for people on the left, we also have to understand the government that we've got, that we would be putting in charge of that system, and consider that and possibly look at other alternatives that may present a better outcome. One thing I will say that can help with the healthcare is actual competition. So right now, they make us pay more for medication, big pharma, because they say they got to have that money for research. But yet we've already got a government institution that's doing research and development, right? So they're kind of double charging you. So what I would say right there is, okay, less government involvement. This is Libertarianism 101. If our own government's doing the research anyway, and they're just charging us for it on the private end because they can, why does the government continue to do the research? If they're going to charge us for it when we pay for the pill, why don't we just eliminate that government department and then we save money in taxes so that when we pay for the pills, they're actually doing the research they claim they're supposed to be doing in the first place, right? So you would save that money more than likely through taxes if it's done correctly. So there's a lot of things you can examine going down the list. If we have honest debate and people are willing to listen, you could pitch this argument to them and possibly, you know, kind of catch their ear a little bit.
Yeah, I just want to throw something in there real quick. The other thing with healthcare specifically would be drug and medicine prices. And, you know, we blame capitalism for that problem. But what it really is the government protecting the pharmaceutical companies. They give them patents that don't allow any other companies to make the same product for less money. When you have, you know, as free a market as possible, there's competition, like Charles said, for the lowest price, for the highest quality. When you have the government protecting one entity and giving it a monopoly on a certain product, there's no competition, so there's no incentive for it to get better or get cheaper, and they can raise the prices as high as they want. They don't have to worry about anyone else creating an alternative. That's what our economy is. We have so many government mandated monopolies, and, you know, a lot of progressives, you know, they hear capitalism or markets and it leaves a dirty taste in their mouths. Where, you know, they've been listening to Republicans too much. Libertarians really want actual competition. They want free flow of prices and qualities to determine what rises and what falls, instead of the government artificially keeping one product at the top. I just wanted to throw that in there. So.
Yeah, and it's good that Joe Jorgensen is going after corporate welfare. I'm really glad that you guys brought up how she wants to attack the military-industrial complex and get out of all these wars. And Charles brought up environmental policy. That right there is doing way more already. If you're advocating for no bombs, that's way better than advocating for green bombs, like how Elizabeth Warren and a lot of these other Democrats were advocating for, as if that's going to solve anything. No, like the military and being in all these wars and drone strikes contributes so much to environmental destruction and climate change. And green bombs, to manufacture those things, that's going to require the consumption of all these resources, most of which come from other countries that we're going to be going into and forcing our way in and grabbing those resources and taking it away. So if you're advocating for anti-imperialism and anti-war, you're already so many steps more ahead than all these fake environmentalist groups like the Sunrise Movement that doesn't even acknowledge imperialism or getting out of all these wars. So I'm really glad that you guys brought that up. Now, I do know that libertarians and Republicans have some crossover. A lot of people are very enthusiastic with Trump right now. And like we know, like us here, like when we go on Israel's show, we advocate a lot for the anti-two-party system that we have, which is really a one-party system and duopoly. So what would you say to Trump supporters that, like, how would you convince them to vote for Libertarian in this election cycle?
So the first thing I would tell them, you know, there are some people who there's literally nothing you can do to pull them away from Trump. I mean, he's their savior. And those people, I mean, you might as well not even bother trying. But there are a lot of people who voted for Trump because they thought he was a true, you know, a true troublemaker, someone who was going to really, you know, shake things up and bring about change. Trump is the establishment. I mean, he, you know, he's been a corporate crony his entire life. So in a way that could have been good, because when he was running in 2016, he was exposing, you know, how the system had worked. He was like, I paid all these guys off on this stage to get what I wanted. I know how it works. I've been on the other side. You let me in there, I'm not going to let it work that way anymore. But as soon as he got in, you know, everything was just business as usual. He talked a lot about taking on the Federal Reserve, talked about crunching down on our debt, talked about getting out of the wars, talked about, you know, protecting the Second Amendment, talked about, I mean, he talked about, and, you know, he hasn't done any of it. And he's actually worked in the opposite direction on a lot of things. Like the Second Amendment, he's passed more gun control than Obama did. You know, with the wars, you know, people are giving him credit for not starting another war. But troop levels are about the same right now as they were when he came in. He just added a ton of them to different countries. He's moved them around. And I mean, we haven't really pulled out of anywhere. We haven't even really pulled out of Syria, even though
Right.
he talked like we were pulling out about a year ago now. We're still there. We're still in Iraq. We're still in Afghanistan. There's talk about reducing troops. I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when we're actually out of there. But I think the talk around removing troops right now is mostly just trying to keep a promise to his base or the people who voted for him on that issue. There was all this talk about getting out of Afghanistan. This should have happened in 2017, as soon as he became president. Why is it happening in an election year right now? And there has been pushback against his anti-war rhetoric from Congress, but he doesn't need Congress to remove the troops. Everyone keeps acting like he needs Congress to sign on to something to get us out of there. We don't need it because we are only overseas because of the AUMF, which was to fight Al Qaeda. And we're not fighting Al Qaeda in most of these countries. We're just there as an occupational force. And there's no constitutional authority for us to be there anymore. So it would just take the swipe of a pen to get us out of there. He has not been a free market, small government capitalist by any stretch. And this is what's hilarious is, the Democrats call him like a crazy right winger. I mean, his economics are not right wing. They're very centrist, very corporatist. He signed the largest spending bill in human history back in March, the CARES Act. And when Thomas Massey, an actual conservative in the Republican Party, called him out on it, he wanted him thrown out of the party. So he's not governed as a fiscal conservative. He hasn't governed as a constitutional conservative. There's really been nothing very conservative at all about his presidency, and that shouldn't be surprising because he was a Democrat most of his life. There's no political philosophy that he hitches his wagon to. He's a complete wild card. So you might occasionally see him do something that seems kind of cool, but then at the same time, he'll do something way out in left field, that you weren't seeing coming down the pipe. So to any Trump supporters who've actually been paying attention to what he's done since he's been in office, seeing who he's allied with, he's going to drain the swamp, and then he hires Mike Pompeo, Rudy Giuliani, John Bolton, like all these terrible swamp creatures from past administrations, just like the most corporate Republican establishment you could ever find. He's a complete fraud. So any true conservative or true constitutionalist, if they're still hitching their wagon to Trump, they're being kind of ignorant. And Jo Jorgensen, the things that the Libertarian Party talks about are what constitutional conservatives, it's most of the things they care about as far as, responsible government, responsible spending, protecting the Constitution. Those are all things that Jo Jorgensen will do that Trump has completely failed them on.
Yeah, I would agree. Something that Reed pointed out right when he started was that there's certain people you're just not going to be able to win. And I would say that's arguably a lot more of the case with Donald Trump than it potentially is going to be for Joe Biden. Joe Biden has got a lot of people who are going to vote for him because they don't like Trump, but not because they're that enthusiastic about a Joe Biden or a Kamala Harris presidency. But there are a lot of people who are bought and sold on Donald Trump and drink that Kool-Aid on a regular basis, okay? The biggest problem with winning anyone over from the Trump base is that they live in a fear or a state of hate for Democrats, liberals, or what they also may call snowflakes. They don't want to see them take the country back over. And they're looking at this kind of what me and Reed have already described, and they would say, look, if I vote for your candidate, and let's just say enough of us in my state did that it let Joe Biden win the state because it split that vote, because, that's the old adage that goes back to H.W. Bush, why he lost the 92 election was because of Ross Perot, right? So they're going to take that and say, well, I could cost Trump this election, and I might not be as enthused on Trump this time around, but I don't want those Democrats, those crazy Democrats. Can't let them have office. Okay. That is the biggest problem with pulling people away from Trump. The only pitch that you could make would be to, in my opinion, independents or some Republicans that are just not that much into Trump. But the pitch that I would certainly make, like Reed pointed out, Donald Trump ran about draining the swamp, got into office, went swimming in the swamp, and now drinks swamp cocktails on a regular basis. Okay. He is a complete swamp creature at this point. The man has literally done almost nothing that he said that he was going to get done. Healthcare did not get any improvement. And you could say that's because that it was voted down by the Senate, and it was. But honestly, what he proposed, I don't think was necessarily that great of a thing. He really ran on the issues of trade, said we got to fix our trade system, this and that. But really, this new NAFTA 2.0 only made slight improvements in certain areas, right? He talked about he was going to be the jobs president. He was going to be the jobs guy, right? Depending on how you want to look at it, I see a lot of reports that say that the jobs are continuing to outsource. I have seen a lot more jobs, for example, come into my state. There's a lot more factories and whatnot than there used to be. So I will say he possibly has done okay with the jobs. Of course, COVID put a huge dent in that because we got companies going out of business left and right. Of course, you know, airliners can get bailed out, as we discussed last night on Israel's show. But a lot of these other people are going out of business who probably didn't have that kind of cash laying around to keep themselves afloat. So the wrong people got the bailouts under the Trump administration. So he didn't stand up for the little guy like he said he would. About really the only thing you could point to that he has truly done to help blue collar America or small business is some of the red tape he's removed on regulations that stifle the creation of business or its growth. That's about the only thing you can point to. His tax cuts, I don't think that really, aside from maybe for someone like me who doesn't have to pay a fee if they don't have health insurance that they can't afford, but try to avoid going to the doctor too. And yet at the end of the year, we got slapped with a fine. So that kind of helped me out in that regard, because now I'm getting more of my money back to do with what I can do with it what I need to, basically, right? But there hasn't been that much that he's actually done for the little man, and that was his whole point, getting out of the wars, and yet he's been dragging his feet, as Reed pointed out. He didn't have to wait on Congress. He could have done it at any time, but that goes to show you he put all those war hawks around him, and it's almost like he's trying to walk the razor's edge. He's still trying to convince a few people he's anti-war, but puts war hawks all around him in his presidential cabinet. So if the only pitch that I could make to someone is look at what Donald Trump ran on, look at what Donald Trump did, and if these are the reasons you voted for Donald Trump, understand he did not fulfill his promises to you. You might want to look at another option. And again, if they're hell-bent that if I were to leave Donald Trump and vote for Joe Jorgensen, I would just help Joe Biden, I don't know how you're really going to win that person, because understand this, the Democrat Party has shunned so many working people who want that outsider that whether Trump lived up to his promises or not, they're not willing to necessarily take a gamble of allowing a Joe Biden or a Kamala Harris to come into office, because they are very afraid of what that would look like.
Yeah. And I'm glad to see that there's more outsider voters, like progressives, independents, than I've ever seen before. But the thing is, like we all agree that we are sick and tired of the duopoly. But right now we're all scattered around with different strategies that we're going to do this election cycle. Some people are going to write in Jesse Ventura, others are going to write in Mark Charles. Other people are going to vote for a Green Party despite all the disorganization and corruption behind that party. Others are going to vote for Libertarian like you guys. And I support all those options this election cycle. I don't think we can all unify around one decision for 2020. We're going to have to figure something out for 2024. So the last question I have for you guys is how would you convince other people who have these other strategies? I myself am undecided right now on what I'm gonna do. So how would you convince these people that want to write somebody in that Joe Jorgensen is the best option for them?
So what I would say is something Ron Paul used to talk about was forming coalitions, and he said you don't have to sacrifice your values. You just get together on what you agree with. I'm not sure I believe that anymore. I think the Republicans and Democrats have sacrificed their values so much that they'll solidify behind anybody that is at their helm. So, Trump is completely different than Mitt Romney, but it didn't matter. The Republicans just all rallied up and got behind him. And then Hillary Clinton is completely different than 2008 Barack Obama, but it didn't matter. Everyone just got behind her, except for, the fringes with Mitt Romney and Hillary Clinton. So I think people like us, independent-minded people who want who want the government to be held responsible, who want to end the wars, who want our civil liberties protected. I think we do need to put our differences aside and create a movement. And I realize this year that's not happening. Like, there are a bunch of left-leaning people I know who are going to vote for Joe Jorgensen. But I would like to see something in 2024. My dream ticket in 2024 would be Justin Amash and Tulsi Gabbard, either way. I don't care which way it is. Someone who could bring an anti-authoritarian left and right movement together to blow up the duopoly. That's not going to happen if no third party gets over 5% this year. I mean, if people want a venue for something like that to happen, then we need to break the stronghold the duopoly has. And that doesn't mean winning. That means getting more than 5%, getting debate access, getting, more recognition for 2024, because people don't realize that every single year, even the Libertarian Party has to fight for ballot access in every single state. And they've made all 50 the last two election cycles. I don't remember in 2012 if they did or not, but they have to fight for it every single year, all the way down the ballot for governor, Senate, Congress, all the way down. And if they get 5% this year, they don't have to do that anymore. They'll just have it. If Joe Jorgensen gets 5% in each state, then in that state, they don't have to fight for all those signatures every year. They'll just instantly have ballot access. So the Libertarian Party has a Libertarian Socialist Caucus, which is kind of what we were talking about with like healthcare cooperatives, things like that. They believe in progressive ideals, but they're approaching it from a non-statist point of view. So they're looking at it as, we want society to look this way, but we believe we can approach it through voluntarism. So I think the Libertarian Party has room for pretty much every anti-authoritarian ideological structure in it. I don't think any other party could fit as wide a span as the Libertarian Party could. The Libertarian Party is the only party that has ideas from the right and the left. Every other party is on one side or the other. So I would encourage progressives, who are thinking about Howie Hawkins or Mark Charles or whatever, I would encourage them to join the Libertarian Party and try to make it a more inclusive party, vote for them this year, at least on the presidential ticket. And I think we could actually see substantive change coming down the pipe. There's all this talk about creating a new party. People don't realize how much of a hassle it is to get all this ballot access, to get the funding, get the name recognition. I mean, the Libertarian Party has been around since 1971, I think. And, it took almost 50 years to get to 50 state ballot access. And we want to start that entire process over next year with some new party that no one's ever heard of. I don't think it's a good strategy. I think the best strategy is flooding the Libertarian Party with pragmatic people on both sides who want more liberty, who want the government to be accountable to us, who want the government to stop leveraging corporations' power against us, to stop, continuing these wars, to protect our civil liberties. And then we can talk about the areas we disagree on afterward. Something I always say is if this country wants to become more progressive, it has to become more libertarian first, because there's no way you're going to make the current government we have become a progressive government that, is working for the people. You have to dismantle the system we have. And then once you have an accountable government, you could start talking about things like healthcare. But there's no way this current government we have is going to do that for us. I mean, that was exemplified in March and April. They couldn't even handle a one-time payment of $1,200 without packing the bill full of tons of crap for corporations and big business. So that's my best pitch to everyone, to vote Libertarian, because there already is a party that can house most of these ideas, and it's going to be on the ballot in all 50 states. And as Charles said earlier, there are tons of libertarians running for congressional positions, running for governor, running for state house. I'm in Utah. I'm lucky I can actually vote down ballot libertarian. I would encourage other people to do that. But, if you're a progressive and you have a down ballot progressive candidate you can vote for, I'd still encourage you to vote for Joe Jorgensen, because we can actually break this threshold and maybe create an avenue for at least one third party to come forward. And if one third party becomes viable, it's going to lead to the possibility of more outside parties becoming viable down the road.
Yeah, I agree with that. One thing I would point out is that there were a lot of people who advocated for the idea of Tulsi running in the Democrat Party, Bernie running in the Democrat Party, or any of these people. They say, well, we need to put them inside the Democrat or the Republican Party so they can be a Trojan horse, get inside the system, and then actually try to get their agendas through. So we want to vote for Democrat or Republican because they've got what we deem a good candidate running on the ballot, even though we probably acknowledge Democrats and Republicans overall are the problem. Because they got that good candidate, we want to go vote for them. So if we can apply that logic to the two parties that are without a doubt the problem, why can that not logic almost be applied to the Libertarian Party, for example, right? And that's not to say that they are a problem or that there needs to be a Trojan horse, but that is a party that you don't have to try to build from the ground up. It's already got the ballot access. As Reed pointed out, if we can continue to get them over the 5%, we're not going to keep having to fight that battle every election cycle. But the thing is, Green Party, way up in the air, tons of disarray, doesn't have ballot access in all 50 states. Neither does the Constitution Party. Mark Charles, while I'm not opposed to people running without a party, that creates an even harder issue because you have no party. You're solid independent, and yet you've got to try to independently grab ballot access in all 50 states. So again, we could argue, well, that's not the right way to do it. Okay, maybe it isn't, but how do you fix that problem? You've got to get something that can infiltrate this system, actually stand real chances of winning, and start taking power away from the Democrats and the Republicans. And take the movement for a people's party. Remember, a people's party, yet it only seems to be left-wing voices and a lot of Bernie folks, right? Furthermore than that, they haven't announced a candidate that I'm aware of for any position, not even, the mayor or the dog catcher, okay? They're not running any candidate whatsoever. So we're off to a great start to all of a sudden build a party that could have ballot access in all 50 states and potentially run candidates for state house, gubernatorial races, mayor races, the Senate, the Congress, the presidency. We're going to get all that within 4 years' time, and yet take the Libertarians, it's taken them over 30 years to get this far. It to me would be asinine to try to start something from the ground up like that when you've got a party right there who you have some people who have some left-wing ideas, some right-wing ideas. We actually bring great minds together who may disagree on some issues, but can find issues that we could agree upon. Again, war. I'm sure we could all agree there needs to be something in education if we really sat down and talked about it. There needs to be some change. we could agree that there's a way to maybe help people get better wages in this country, aside from what the federal government's been trying with a federal minimum wage that does not reflect the cost of living state to state. There's a lot of things that if we're going to come into it with an open mind and have discussion, we can fix. But understand this, as long as we're fighting amongst ourselves in the first place about these issues, you're not going to take anything away from the Democrats and the Republicans. They've got too strong of a hold on the country for us to be bickering amongst ourselves and then somehow find a way to overtake them. So there's going to be millions of Democrats and Republicans, and they're going to go vote, right? So if we take the Libertarians or the Greens or just say independents, we just take all the independents out there and we divide that vote potentially, 5, maybe 6 different directions, writing in Tulsi, writing in Jesse, writing in Mark Charles, writing in Joe, or voting for Joe, voting for Howie Hawkins. There may even be another write-in out there somewhere. You got the Constitution Party. They'll have someone out there. You just keep dividing the numbers, and it doesn't make any candidate look like they have very much support, right? So you've got to get that unity together to get anyone outside of the Democrats or the Republicans any kind of recognition that, hey, we're building something here. If we just keep considering the 2 who get the most votes are only split by 2, but yet us independents are going to split our votes by 4, 5, 6. The math doesn't add up. When you look at how many people don't like Democrats and Republicans, consider themselves independent or whatever, there's arguably about just as much of us as there are Democrats and Republicans. So what we've got to find a way to do is unify together to really put up a fight for Democrats and Republicans so that we could potentially beat them. But really the only way you're going to do that is to get people into a party that's already got some internal workings that don't make it such an extreme uphill battle for success. And that's why one thing I really want to see the Libertarians focus on, I want to see more people come to the Libertarian Party. But even if we get all those people in, what I want to see is more of a focus on getting some congressional seats, becoming some Libertarian senators from some state. Start taking that foundation away from Capitol Hill that props the Democrats and the Republicans up. And if we could take a few of those, sure, we could run a presidential candidate in 2024, but I don't want that to be the focus, because that down method is just going to cause failure anyway. We need to make it so the Democrats and the Republicans cannot wrecking ball the House or the Senate, especially, by the way, if Joe Biden wins in November and they proceed with ideas such as court packing or removing the filibuster in the Senate so that it can be done on 51 vote. Okay. You've got to seriously take some leverage away from these 2 parties in that branch of government. And then we can really put focus on the presidency.
Yeah. You guys both brought up very convincing arguments, and you guys brought up a lot of great points that I have against the movement for a People's Party. I really hope, and I think we will figure out a way for all of us to unite. There's way more of us that are sick and tired of the 2-party system than there are people who like it. So Charles and Reed, thank you guys again for coming on. I'll leave the link to their YouTube channels in the description for you guys to check out. And other than that, stay informed. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.